Now recently, a massive survey was conducted by a US-based organization called Pew Research Center, and they reached out to thousands of people across dozens of countries worldwide, asking one key question: what do you think about the United States? This is likely one of the most comprehensive surveys ever done on the global image of the US. It gives us a clear picture of which countries today see the US favorably, meaning positively, or unfavorably, meaning negatively. You'll find plenty of articles published on this topic as well. This survey covered 24 countries, asking people, what's your perspective on the United States? More specifically, what do you think about US foreign policy? Because let's face it, as foreigners, people around the world are most impacted by America's foreign policy, whether it's in Brazil, India, Germany, Israel, or Turkey. Now, you might be wondering, why should Americans care what the rest of the world thinks about us? Sure, that kind of sentiment looks great on social media, X, Instagram, you name it. But in the real world, in geopolitics, your nation's image, your reputation, matters tremendously. There was a famous Greek philosopher, Cyrus, from centuries ago, who said that a good reputation, if the world respects you, likes you, trusts you, is worth more than money. Because with a strong reputation, forget wealth. You can gain influence, power, and so much more. You can grow as a nation. You can shape global outcomes. So, in geopolitics, it's not just about how Americans see themselves. We need to stay constantly aware of how the world perceives the US today and what our global image looks like. Let's dive into the survey. First, a quick heads up. This survey was conducted between January and April 2025, before some major events, like the recent tariffs announced by President Donald Trump on April 2nd, 2025, which stirred up global reactions. So this data captures a snapshot before those developments, but it still tells us a ton about how the world views the US, starting with the numbers in Canada, our neighbor to the north. Only about 34% of people have a favorable view of the US today, down significantly from 54% last year. That's a 20-point drop, and 64% now view the US unfavorably, with 39% saying very unfavorably. This is a big shift, and it might be tied to recent tensions, like trade disputes or differing views on global issues. Meanwhile, in the US, 74% of Americans view Canada favorably, showing a stark contrast in mutual perceptions. Now, let's talk about Europe. In countries like Germany, France, and Sweden, the US has taken a hit. For example, in Germany, only 25% of people view the US positively, compared to 63% among those who support the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD party. This shows a huge ideological divide. People on the right tend to like the US more than those on the left. In France, favorable views dropped 8 points since 2024, and in Sweden, they plummeted from 47% to 19%. Mexico saw an even bigger drop, 32 points, from 61% to 29%. These declines are partly linked to low confidence in President Trump's leadership, with more than half of people in 19 of the 24 countries surveyed lacking confidence in him. But it's not all bad news. In some countries, the US enjoys strong support. Take Israel, where 83% of people view the US favorably, one of the highest ratings in the survey. This is driven by strong ideological alignment, especially among those on the right, with 97% of right-leaning Israelis holding a positive view. Poland also stands out, with 86% expressing favorable opinions, though that's down slightly from last year. In the Asia-Pacific, countries like Japan, 55%, South Korea, 70%, and the Philippines, 70%, give the US high marks, often tied to shared security concerns and alliances like the Quad. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why the mixed feelings? A big factor is US foreign policy. A median of 76% across the 24 countries say the US doesn't take their interests into account when making foreign policy decisions. This sentiment is strong even among allies, except in places like Japan and Germany, where fewer people feel this way. For example, in Greece, 93% say the US interferes in other countries' affairs, compared to 56% who say the same about China. That's a 37-point gap, showing the US is often seen as more meddlesome. Then there's the Trump factor. Since his second term began on January 20th, 2025, global confidence in Trump has been low. Majorities in most countries lack confidence in his ability to handle issues like immigration, the Russia-Ukraine war, US-China relations, or climate change. Many describe him as arrogant or dangerous, though 18 countries see him as a strong leader. This polarizing image impacts the US's reputation. For instance, his tariffs on China and other countries, announced after the survey, have sparked debates. In the US, 52% of Americans think these tariffs will hurt the country, and 53% say they'll hurt them personally. Let's talk about an example that stirred things up: the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In the survey, 43% of Americans feel Trump favors Russia too much, while only 3% say he favors Ukraine. This perception might resonate globally, especially after his February 28, 2025, meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, which got a lot of attention. In Europe, views on US handling of conflicts like this are mixed. For instance, 77% of people in the UK and 67% in Germany felt negatively about how the US handled the Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021, and similar skepticism might apply to current policies. Now, you might ask, does this negative perception mean the US is losing its edge? Not necessarily. The US still has massive soft power. American movies, music, and tech, think Hollywood, Apple, or Netflix, are loved worldwide. In the survey, majorities in many countries, especially in places like Nigeria and Kenya, give high marks to US entertainment and technology. Even in Muslim-majority countries like Indonesia, 80% view US education favorably. Cricket might not be a thing here, but basketball, the NFL, and American pop culture connect people globally. Just look at the global hype around the Super Bowl or Marvel movies. That cultural pull keeps the US relevant. But where knowledge about the US is low, perceptions suffer. Take Latin America. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. Only 29% in Mexico view the US favorably, and similar trends hold in Brazil. 37% among older adults. Why? Limited cultural exposure. Unlike India or the UK, where US movies and brands are everywhere, Latin America has less direct interaction with American culture. Plus, online narratives, sometimes exaggerated, about US policies or immigration issues shape opinions. I spoke to some folks familiar with the region, and they pointed out that many Latin Americans know the US through news about border policies or trade disputes, not through positive cultural exchanges. Let's zoom in on Australia, where 54% view the US unfavorably. This is surprising given our shared history. Think ANZUS, the Quad, or cricket-like camaraderie in sports. But inflation and housing costs in Australia are sky high, and some Aussies blame foreign influence, including US economic policies, for driving up prices. This mirrors a broader trend. Economic frustrations often get pinned on the US as the world's leading economy. In contrast, places like Nigeria and Kenya give the US high marks, 78% favorable in Kenya, partly because of US aid, tech investments, and cultural exports like Hollywood. Now let's talk about a tough case, Turkey. Only 25% of Turks view the US favorably, one of the lowest ratings. This isn't new. Since 2002, Turkey has consistently given the US low marks. Part of this stems from geopolitical tensions, like US support for certain regional policies or alliances that clash with Turkish interests. Social media doesn't help. Posts on X often amplify negative stereotypes about the US, like claims of cultural arrogance or overreach. But in places like Japan, where 55% view the US positively, shared values and security ties outweigh these narratives. Here's an interesting case. South Africa. It's a mixed bag, with views leaning neutral. About half of South Africans see the US positively, thanks to US brands, aid, and tech investments. But there's skepticism about US foreign policy, especially in Africa, where some see it as self-serving. Compare that to Israel, where the US is seen as a close ally, or Nigeria, where American soft power, think Beyoncé or Microsoft, wins hearts. One thing to note, age and ideology matter. Younger people, under 35, in places like Brazil and Turkey, view the US more favorably than older folks. In Brazil, 73% of younger adults like the US, compared to 37% of those over 50. Ideology also plays a role. Right-leaning people like supporters of Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro or Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu are far more pro-US than left-leaning folks. In Canada, 52% of right-leaning people view the US favorably, compared to just 17% on the left. Now let's be honest, some of the negative views come from missteps. Take the US withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. A median of 57% across 17 countries said it was poorly handled, with 77% in the UK and 67% in Germany agreeing. Or look at recent tariffs announced after this survey, which sparked backlash in places like China and Canada. These moves feed into perceptions of the US as overbearing. But when the US stands firm on principles, like supporting allies or countering authoritarianism, it earns respect. Look at Poland, where US support during the Ukraine crisis boosted its image to 93% favorable in 2023. So, what's the takeaway? The US's global image is a mixed bag, 49% favorable, 49% unfavorable across the 24 countries. It's loved in places like Israel and Poland, but faces skepticism in Europe, Latin America, and Turkey. If the US stays true to its values, freedom, innovation, leadership, while addressing concerns about overreach, it can rebuild trust. Like Canada showed us, standing firm can turn skeptics into supporters over time. Finally, I want to hear from you. These 24 countries, Canada, Germany, Japan, Israel, Turkey, and more. Which one do you view most favorably? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Millions watch this, and your likes and comments will outnumber this survey's sample size. Share your perspective, and as I always say, may the God watch over you.